one-on-one in the barn. My name is Flavio Zaclis, and I'm the founding partner for Barn Investments. In this series of brief interviews, we're going to be talking one-on-one with a few of our portfolio company CEOs. The idea behind these interviews is to have our CEOs talk about their business, share valuable information about the industry that they currently work in and the markets that they market their products in, and also obviously share a lot of the challenges that these entrepreneurs go through when dealing with their daily activities. For today, I have the honor to invite to this talk the founding partner and the CEO for Avicanna, which is a company that we invested in the beginning of this year, in January of 2020. It works in the medicinal cannabis business. This is a sector and industry that we've been looking to invest for a very, very long time. Till we finally met with the guys from Avicanna, and we thought it was a perfect fit for the kind of investment that we were looking for. So with no further ado, I have the honor to have with me today, Aras Azadian. Aras, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Flavio. Pleasure to be here. Just to introduce myself, I guess personally first. My name is Aras. I'm one of the co-founders of Avicanna. Started the company in 2015, really. And that was at a time where the industry was really just beginning within the cannabis space, specifically here in Toronto, where we are. Prior to that, I was a COO of an oncology company in the diagnostic space and cancer diagnostics. Prior to that, I worked in finance. Education-wise, background is economics, MBA, but I've just been drawn to the biotech pharma sector, and that's precisely why we've taken that particular path within Avicanna. So Avicanna is a biopharma, biotech company within the cannabinoid space. Since inception, we drew a line in the sand and we said we're going to strictly focus on the medical aspects and a data-driven, clinically driven utility of cannabinoids. And the reason why we did that early on was everyone else was really focused on the recreational side and just growing the flower. We saw the potential, the medical efficacy potential of cannabinoids, and realized the only way to get that to the patients in a safe, consistent way and to draw the attention of the doctors was to back it up with actual data, consistency, and claims. And nobody was really doing that. Everybody was looking for the early cash that they can make either from stock promotion or from selling recreational products, and that's where we drew the line. Today, Avicanna is vertically integrated. Our cultivation projects are in Colombia, where it makes, from a cost perspective, a lot of sense. Also, we're organic certified USDA. We are sustainable. We're using nature as the major drivers to make sure that our crops are successful. All our research and development, clinical development is done in Canada. We're collaborating with some of the most important academic and clinical institutions here in Canada. We have a number of commercial divisions that range from the raw materials, the cannabinoids themselves, to seeds, to feminized premium seeds for both hemp and cannabis, to a consumer product line called Pura, which is really skincare, to medical cannabis line, which is called Row, and then finally our pharmaceutical pipeline, which is going through various clinical trials right now. So it's become a much more diverse, I would say, vertically integrated, complex international company over the last 5 years, and we take a lot of pride in that. And within this sort of life cycle, we've maintained the strictly medical and data-driven aspects of the business.
Well, it kind of basically chose not to be part of the recreational side of the business, and it's basically focusing all of its effort on the medicinal side of it, right? When you look at the industry, cannabis and cannabinoid-related products have been prohibited for approximately 100 years, and there's been a lot of buzz around it for the last years or so. I think there's a lot of misinformation, but there's also a lot of progress that's being made. What has changed now, Aras, from the industry a few years before? What have been these major changes, and how do you see the market today versus the market in 5 or 10 years from now?
A lot has changed, and I'll start with the change. Early on, it was a bit of a frenzy. It was a bit of a gold rush, or they called it the green rush, and everybody basically believed they can become a cannabis entrepreneur. And the problem there was many of the early CEOs, which 99% of them are gone now, were really just focused on capital markets rather than building actual sustainable long-term businesses. Nobody cared about data, yet they thought they sold medicine. Nobody really focused on building sustainable businesses. Instead, they focus on acquisitions. The industry has changed in a way that those CEOs of these large, especially Canadian companies that essentially misled both the investors and the market are gone. In parallel, there was a lot of bad players even on the CBD side. So that's another issue that the industry had in the earlier stages was there's a lot of companies producing what we call garage-made products that either didn't have what the cannabinoids they said they had, so they were misclaimed, products that were not stable, products that were not safe. And I think that was another issue that early on came in with the frenzy. There was a bit of that snake oil salesman kind of frenzy going on. And the problem with both of those is that the first, with the overly hyped capital market frenzy, is that it really frightened institutional investors. It frightened sophisticated investors because it put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. And today, if you look at the cannabis sector, less than 3% on average of cannabis companies are owned by institutions. So it's completely retail. So there's a lack of smart money and sophisticated, I would say, approach to investment within the space, which now limits the growth of companies that are actually doing real business. On the, let's say, early garage-made product aspect, the problem with that is a lot of people got sick. Look at the vaporizer incidents in the United States. A lot of people tried cannabis and it didn't work for them. But maybe it would have if they had the right dose, the right delivery, and the products were actually safe and stable and actually accurate from a label perspective. So I often say in earlier stages, we fought the stigma of cannabis. Today, we fight the stigma of cannabis in a different way. Now the stigma is, are the products actually going to work? Are the companies actually real? So I think that what we're facing now, and the sector is facing a very, very difficult time, is that this overhype, this frenzy, this bubble has burst. Yet there is real companies and there's a real industry out there. So if you look at the industry, if I would have told you, Flavio, 5 years ago that the Canadian cannabis market is going to be worth $1 billion in 2019, you would have thought I'm a lunatic, right? And the fact that it's growing year by year, 30, 40%, makes it a very attractive industry. However, because we were misled, because it was overhyped, all of a sudden, an industry that's growing 30, 40% a year is almost a disappointment, So I think the industry is real. I think we're transitioning and evolving. I think a lot of the bad players, from bad CEOs to bad hedge funds to stock manipulators and promoters to the garage-made producers, are all going to fade away, because as the industry grows, there's smarter investments and investors, there is better companies, and there's more regulations coming into place. And I think what you will start seeing is less companies being vertically integrated and more companies focusing on actually what they're very good at. So you'll start seeing more Avicannas of the world that are strictly medical, and you'll see companies like Canopy that will become strictly recreational, or adult use. So that's the transition I'm starting to see within the general aspects of the sector. Finally, I think cannabis and cannabinoids needs to, in my opinion, not only be separated into various segments, but it needs to be understood as an ingredient. If someone takes CBD and puts it into a cosmetic product, example, Pura, that is not a cannabis product, that's a cosmetic product. If someone takes a cannabinoid and puts it into a pharmaceutical drug form, whether it's synergistic with other active ingredients or not, that is not a cannabis product, that's a pharmaceutical drug for epilepsy or for cardiovascular disease, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the potential for cannabinoids as an ingredient is immense, and it's very different than these market potentials that everyone else has been saying, which is, in my opinion, completely adult use or recreational.
That's a really good point. I think there's a huge misconception, even when we talk to our investors, about what cannabis-based products are. I think a lot of the people directly assume that if it's a cannabis product, it's related to smoking and it's related to recreational use. But as you said, there are products that have CBD inputs in them, which have nothing to do with psychoactive ingredients. They're not going to be consumed in smoking or even eating. They're going to be applied to your skin, and they have a medicinal effect. And it's just, it uses one of the components found in the plant.
Yep.
That brings me to the next question. I had the opportunity in 2009 to visit with many companies in your sector. And it became clear to me, as you said, we're going to see companies moving to more specific things. So we're going to see Avicanna, we're going to see canopies, one more related to recreational, one with a lot of knowledge on the medicinal part of the business. But I came to learn through these through the travels that for now, at this point in time in the industry, for a company such as Avicanna, for example, it is really important to dominate the genetics part of the business and the cultivation part of the business. You might not need that in the future, but as of now, if you're to produce your own medicine and patent medicine and have new discoveries, you need to be able to control the genetics that go into the plant, right? What is Avicanna doing in terms of that, and what are some of the differentials that the company has compared to other companies?
And that's a very good point, and I'm glad we're aligned. I mean, I've had the pleasure of hosting you in our facilities in Colombia and in beautiful Santa Marta, so you've seen the scale and the scope of the way we do things there. And I often have to have this conversation with a lot of pharmaceutical or biotech investors that say, listen, I really like your intellectual property portfolio, I like your products, I like your drugs, I like your clinical pathway, but I don't like the fact that you have a raw material business. And I think that's very important to explain why we have that. The industry is in such an early stage still that if I want to be a drug development company and I want to work with cannabinoids, where am I going to source pharmaceutical grade, standardized, quality cannabinoids that are organic, sustainable, that are coming within a quality spec that I need consistently? The answer to that today is it doesn't exist. There's many companies striving towards it, but especially 3 years ago when we became vertically integrated, it did not exist. So we had to become vertically integrated. So for us, vertical integration is really for three purposes. One is to ensure that we have consistent supply of the raw materials. I can develop the most amazing drugs in the world, but if my raw material supply chain is weak and it's disrupted with this, very volatile industry, then my product line, my entire business is vulnerable. Two, I wanted to make sure that I can control the quality and the price of that. So we are cultivating, as you know, within an organic, sustainable measure. We're cultivating within Santa Marta, where it's 12 hours of sunlight all year round. We use very little electricity. We're able to do so at a fraction of the cost. So my cost per gram today is around 3 to 4 cents. The cost per gram in Canada and the United States is now between $1 to $2 a gram. So we have substantially lower raw material, input material costs. Three is the genetics, which you mentioned. So for us, a genetic program initially was very important because it allowed us to diversify and look for specific rare genetics that we were looking for, and more importantly, rare cannabinoids. There's a big market on CBD, there's a big market on THC, but we started doing a lot of breeding programs 2 years ago with some of the universities here in Canada, including the University of Guelph. And we've been able to develop, as an example, a genetic or cultivar that has up to 17% CBG. That's a genetic that used to be once a rare cannabinoid. Now, what that has done for us is, as a biotech company, that allows us to do a lot of research around the potential of CBG and a cannabinoid that has very, very little patents around it, and to see which clinical indications it'll be efficacious for. But two, that genetic program being as advanced as it is allowing us to produce commercial seeds. So we're actually producing seeds and exporting. So finally, this raw material vertical integration that we've developed is actually allowing us to generate early revenues, because the other aspects of the business still take longer. So, and this is very important, because when you are a medical pharma company, you might be compared to the recreational companies with the same metrics as, why aren't you generating as much revenue as them today? And the answer is, they take flower, they put it in a bag, and they sell it. I take flower, I extract it, I isolate the compound. After years of R&D, I put that into a finished product that goes through manufacturing under GMP standards, then goes through clinical trials, then it goes to the market. We have a very different product lifeline.
And it's definitely not as simple as you're saying. I mean, the whole extraction process and being able to get the right output of it without exceeding the amounts of THC, for example, that you could have, that is not a simple thing. That is not a simple thing. So I think now, for me at least, I understand how complex it is, but also I think the complexity is what really, whoever gets there will have a first hand in the industry, Which countries or markets do you expect to be major players or market leaders in the cannabis industry, and why in the next few years?
So Canada, and it's biased because I'm Canadian, but I think Canada was the first G8 country to legalize it. And that allowed two things to happen. One, capital markets, and everybody went public and everyone raised, a ton of money. I think last year, $12 billion was raised in the sector. I wouldn't say that money was well managed, but a lot of money was raised. The other thing Canada allowed was research, development, clinical trials, because it was federal. So Avicanna, for example, has 3 cannabinoid research licenses. One inside the University of Toronto in a collaboration with the Department of Pharmacy or the Faculty of Pharmacy. One inside Mars, inside a Johnson & Johnson incubator. These are things that other cannabinoid companies outside of Canada can't really even hope to do. That level, the level of sophisticated research and clinical development that we're doing. And this allows Canadian companies that do pursue this path, like the Avicannas, to have a very strong intellectual property portfolio. And when the United States, for example, goes federal and more pharma companies or bigger companies enter, this gives Canada an edge. So this is something that's very underappreciated. I don't typically talk about because I don't like to give away that strategy, but everybody took Canada's advantages. You can go public in Canada and you can build a business. We looked at it as, wow, we can do research and clinical trials and get patents. And when this industry does become massive, we'll be leaders of that and everybody will have to just basically come to us for IP. So I think Canada is very important. The market is the biggest legal market, biggest federal market, $1 billion last year. I think 2020 will be probably around $2 billion. United States, but the United States is very, very difficult to operate in a way that there is recreational in some states, there's medicinal in some states. It is operated in many cases from smaller companies that have evolved, but because it's not federal and you can't cross borders in most cases, in my opinion, it is a bit elementary still. And because you can't go as a United States operator, it's proceeds of crime if you're selling THC at a federal level. You can't go and be publicly traded on the NASDAQ, for example. You don't have the same flexibility as we do to do clinical trials and R&D. So there's a lot of limitations, but once the US goes federal, they're behemoth. They're going to completely overshadow everybody else. So I think US 3 to 5 years from now, Canada for the next 3 years has an opportunity to really build on that advantage that it had. I think Colombia is going to be an industrial scale producer of raw materials, which is going to be CBD, THC, the rare cannabinoids like Avicanna is already exporting, seeds like Avicanna is already exporting. And then the European Union. The European Union is going to be a massive medical and consumer CBD products market. They're a little bit different than the US side, in which there's much more focus on medical research, data, quality standards, GMP manufacturing, a lot less potential on the recreational side in the short term. So I always say, Flavio, and you know this, every market, every government, every country is completely different within the cannabinoid world. They treat CBD different than they treat THC. They treat THC different, and they all compared to other countries are different. So there's no turnkey solution to understanding the complexity of the regulations globally. But we've sort of mastered that in the last 5 years. But I can tell you, it continues to get more complex. I do imagine in the next 5 years, you will see some streamlined kind of GMP standards and requirements and standardized testing that will become global, but we're not there yet.
So from what I understand, what I've saw and everything that we've talked about is you're in Latin America and Colombia because there's a huge cost advantage and there's accessibility to product. So you're producing a gram of flower at around 5 cents a gram, while in North America, it costs anywhere from $1.50 to $2 a gram. So there's a huge advantage there. But you're also in Canada, where you have a huge R&D facility, and you can access technologies to produce great medicine. One of the questions that we always have is, it's two different kinds of business. One is kind of more like a genetics ad business, and there are people that are running that, especially in Colombia. But there's also a very complex part of the business, which is the lab part of the business. So what kind of people does Avicanna employ today, both both on the lab side and on the farming side. And how do you deal with that? It's different kinds of people working for the company.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think the way this is better presented is in Colombia we have two subsidiaries that we own majority stake in. One is called Santa Marta Golden Hemp, and one is called Sativa Nativa. Within those companies, Santa Marta Golden Hemp, Sativa Nativa, you have employees that are 99% agricultural. So they're just engineers and workers on the ground, and they're in charge of cultivation and post-harvest. Then you have Avicanna Latam employees that are professionals in most cases. They range from architects to engineers to scientists to executives and lawyers, and you've met some of those guys. Those guys are managing both those assets, and they're much more sophisticated, much more technical. So in Santa Marta, which is a very small city, we do have 5-10 scientists and tons of engineers and architects and professionals that are generally not from Santa Marta. A lot of them have come from Argentina, from Spain, from other parts of the world to work on the project. And they're the ones that are both from a corporate perspective managing the project, but also from a technical perspective, writing the SOPs, implementing the SOPs, optimizing the extraction isolation procedures and all the technical stuff around genetics. So you have a mix of both. And that technical Avicanna team that's there operates and cooperates with the Toronto scientific team that is like our head of R&D and all those guys. So they're actually quite aligned. They're working together on a daily basis. The experiments are typically written here by the Toronto scientific team, the leadership of Avicanna scientific team, and then implemented there. So they're a lot more intertwined and connected than one would imagine. And we've been using Zoom for a while, but now it's become the cool thing to do, obviously, given the pandemic. But Flavio, myself, our head of R&D, we would fly to Colombia every 2 weeks. I was doing 2 weeks there, 2 weeks here, because there's a lot that goes through, and then finally, we do a lot of our manufacturing in Colombia, like in Bogota. So then that's quite technical as well, right? Like our R&D and pharmaceutical team have to go there to make sure the manufacturing is up to our standard. So it's complex. I wouldn't say Santa Marta or Colombia is just agro, because that would be unfair. There's a lot of research that gets done there, from genetics to formulations to extraction, isolation, and then there's manufacturing and global standards that gets done.
Do you guys believe that Latin America might be an interesting consuming market in the future, other than just being an input market? Especially for Brazil, where we're at, we know that there's a huge demand for product. Legislation has started to move towards liberalization for medicine specifically. And if that happens in a more broad way, we should expect a very, very huge consuming market. How has Avicanna been dealing with that potential market in the last few months or so?
Yeah, I would say our predominant focus in Latin America has been Colombia first, second Brazil. And Brazil is quite complex on its regulations and its registration process, which is pretty aligned with what we do. They require dossiers, they require stability work, they require GMP manufacturing, which is all the things we have in place. We're applying for these dossiers, both from a Canadian manufacturing perspective, from MediPharm, which is GMP, also from Altea in Colombia, which is GMP. So we are pursuing the Brazilian pathway. We do think Latin America in the long term is going to be a massive market, especially for us, because we're intertwined within that market. We are well respected within that market, and we have better products with lower costs. I do imagine it's going to be a very successful market, but it's going to take time. One of the advantages that Latin America has is the product registration format. In Canada, medical cannabis is being sold as medical cannabis. It's not a registered drug. It's not what we would call a DIN, a drug identification number. It's quite vague. You can't make a lot of claims. What Avicanna is doing is we're putting more sophisticated products in the market and then educating the clinicians and the researchers. But there is a market that already exists here. We know that there is, 500,000 patients already in Canada or more that are being prescribed, that are buying medical cannabis, and we're targeting a piece of that market share. In Colombia, we don't know yet. We don't know what the magisterial model that they're launching, what the size and scope of that is. And I think Colombian population and medical community and Latin American medical community is relatively conservative compared to the Canadian, and they will require the data, the education, the training. So I think that's a part that needs to have the appropriate dedication and level of investment into. But the part that I want to get to is the registration. In Colombia and Latin America, you have the opportunity to register cannabis products, theoretically, as phytotherapeutics, as generic drugs, as medical drugs that you can actually make claims around without the full clinical development pathway. In some cases, just phase 2, in some cases, just referencing literature that exists. So Latin America, I think, is going to allow a little bit easier pathway into medical registration of particular drugs. Again, like the European Union, it's only focused on medical. So I think there's an opportunity there for companies like us.
Perfect. We know that you guys are working on trials for specific medicine. I think that's really interesting. Within the information that you can share with us, what kind of trials are you guys running out for what kind of medication? What is the timing that we should expect for those kinds of medications to come out, if they do come out?
Right. So we categorize our trials into 3 formats. Cosmetics, which was the Pura line, which we did a study on acne-prone patients and eczema-prone patients, and another one on anti-aging. Those studies are already complete. They're going in for publication now. We're referencing the data for registration that we did in the European Union. So that, like, the Pura line became the first cosmetic CBD line or skincare CBD line in the world that has actual human data. And those are studies of about 60 patients per study. Those are already complete. Then what we have, the second area is called observational trials or real world evidence trials. And those are trials based on products that are already approved. So our medical line in Canada and globally is called Row Phytotherapeutics. The Row brand of products is already approved by Health Canada to be launched as medical cannabis. So you can't call them indication specific. I can't give it to a patient and say this is an epilepsy drug or this is a chronic pain drug, but they could get prescribed by their doctors for that, and then they can go and buy the product. Because those products are already available, it's sort of a phase 4, because the products are in the market and I can then put them into subcategories and have a specific key opinion leader or clinician monitor a bunch of patients on a particular therapeutic indication. So we're doing a number of those right now. We're currently in the process of putting together one for multiple sclerosis, for Parkinson's, for chronic pain. And those are going to be very interesting because those are happening ASAP. Those are all happening starting from the next month where the products are launched in about 2 weeks to the next 6 months. We're going to start generating more and more data. The purpose behind the real world evidence trials and these observational trials is we start looking for signals. We start seeing what works for what type of patients. Because these protocols are still drafted by top clinicians, top medical institutions, and are formatted in a way that the data is actually valid. We can actually start looking for areas and particular disease groups that have the highest, let's say, potential for success. And then we can target that within our pharmaceutical pathway. That's one of the major benefits. The second benefit is we are getting evidence out there that shows cannabinoids are actually safe and they work in these potential therapeutic areas for the medical community. I can then go to the medical community in Brazil and say, hey, now that I'm launching Row in Brazil, there's a study that was done by this major medical institution in Canada, this major clinician, and we took 500 patients that were using Row, and we had a very low dropout rate, and we had so much success in these potential target areas that we were looking at. So that's the observational trial area. And then finally is our pharmaceutical trials. So the pharmaceutical pathway takes the typical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trial pathway that a pharmaceutical drug goes. But because cannabinoids are generally regarded as much safer, we can avoid a lot of the toxicity studies, and in some cases even phase 1. And we're currently in phase 2 for 3 trials. One is for a rare disease, skin disease called epidermolysis bullosa. That's a disease where children, sometimes they're referred to as butterfly children. It's a terrible, terrible disease. They have open wounds that generally don't heal. We've been working on this trial for about 2 years with the largest children's hospital in Canada called Sick Kids. We recently resubmitted our phase 2 application, and we believe we're going to get that accepted, and we're going to be able to start that trial within the next 3 to 4 months. So that's a rare disease, an orphan drug that will follow from the phase 2. If it's successful, we're going to a multi-site phase 3. We will look to do an FDA submission as well. We are also doing a neuropathic pain study for sickle cell patients. We recently finished a prevalence study that has gone well. Now we're in the protocol stage for phase 2. and that's going to be a sublingual delivery. The third more exciting trial we're working on now is with Dr. Hans Clark here with the UHN, biggest medical institution here in Canada, and it's a chronic pain opioid sparing study. So we're taking a number of chronic pain patients, we're providing them, it's a double-blinded placebo. All of these pharma trials are double-blinded placebo studies. And we're providing them with placebos, CBD only, CBD THC, to see how much of the opiate reduction we can measure and how much of the pain reduction we can measure. And those are all happening in 2020. So we're quite advanced in those, but you're doing that in parallel with observational, in parallel with cosmetics, in parallel with agricultural projects, in parallel with commercial projects. So there's a lot happening in the company. It's a bit complex. You know the story, so it's easier for you to digest, but that's really where we see the future. And all of these things really do support each other, generate data that can then be complementary as well.
Perfect. So for consumers, today, if I'm looking to buy one or a few of the Avicanna's products, where can I find your products out there?
In Colombia, you can find Pura, the skincare line. That's available online on the website. You can buy it from some of the retailers, Chromantic and Blind. In the next few weeks, we're launching it online and also in select retailers in the United Kingdom. It'll be available in the UK. It'll be available in about a month and a half in the United States. So we're actually launching Pura in a number of countries. Pura will be available in Canada, I think August for September 2020, so in the next 3 months. Our medical line, Row, through a licensing agreement, is currently launched in California, in the state of California. Row is also launching in about 2 weeks with the largest pharmacy chain here in Canada called Shoppers Drug Mart. So it's exclusively offered to shoppers through the medical portal and through a specific clinical portal that they have. And we're hoping to launch Row in the UK, I think late July, beginning of August, and in Colombia in September. So we are active in a couple of markets, but on the finished product segments, Canada, US, UK, Colombia are the early markets.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. Moving to a more personal set of questions. As an entrepreneur, working in a novel industry, let's put it that way, with so many challenges, I think one of the things that we really try to do with our entrepreneurs is to share experience amongst them. You are in an old new market with a lot of barriers, especially, I think people have this misconception about the market, its products, and the plant itself. So I'm sure you faced a lot of challenges in being an entrepreneur. We would love to have you share some of these challenges. What were the major challenges in putting up Avicanna, and what are the major challenges that you face today as an entrepreneur?
Oof.
It's a long question. I mean, it's
No, it's fair. So I'll tell you this: in the first year or two, you're very young, right? So that's always been a thing. I'm 33 now, so when I started Avicanna with Setu and Kyle, I was 28, 27. Yet I was an experienced executive in the biotech space, right? But I mean, that often gets forgotten. So that was a factor, but we got past that pretty quick. The second thing was, why medical? Why aren't you growing weed and selling joints? Why research and clinical development? Nobody wants to invest in that. That was the first 3 years. I still face that challenge a bit, but I think we've earned our position as thought leaders on the research side. So why do you want to do research? And my simple answer was, do you think cannabinoids have medical benefit? Yes, I do. What kind of medicine has no data or consistency? So that was quite a challenge in the beginning. Then it was, why Colombia? Why are you not growing here in a factory and spending thousands of dollars or millions of dollars on building an infrastructure and then making extremely uncompetitive flower in Canada, which obviously I was proven to be right. So and a lot of negative references were made to Colombia, which is unfortunate and I think unfair to the Colombian people and their history. So we face a lot of, why are you guys doing things your way? and I think time has proven that we've done things the right way within the decision making we've made. We didn't go to 10 countries to grow, we went to one. You're seeing the canopies and the Afrias pull out of 9 countries and stay in Canada and then downsize in Canada. We went to Colombia. We knew it was the right place. We built an infrastructure there that makes sense, and we did research and clinical development, and we're still with the same researchers, same executive team, same clinicians from the beginning. So a lot of that was the early challenge for us. Today, I face a pandemic. I also face a global, obviously a recession, but more so on the cannabis side. Prior to the pandemic, there's been a meltdown happening within the sector for about 9 months. Retail investors are brokenhearted. They've been lied to, they've been cheated. Institutional investors are afraid of the sector. So fundraising has been a huge challenge. It's been difficult, and we spend as an executive team a lot of our time in being extremely efficient in OpEx. We've been able to reduce OpEx and CapEx, in hundreds of % over the last 2 quarters. And we're pushing to be revenue generating and cash flow positive, which a company in the biotech pharma clinical space typically is not. My focus typically should be get my drugs out to the market, make my medical products successful, and that in 3 years from now, I will be cash flow positive, but we're talking about above 100 million revenue. But I had to transition and pivot the business into one that can make cash flows now and profits now. And it's because the capital markets and the investment world has really been hurt, and the stigma of bad investments in the cannabis space is overhung by everybody. So I think that's the real challenge for us. I think myself and my team have become extremely efficient in optimizing all of that, and we pivoted really, really fast. But that is a huge burden for me and the executive team that we face on a daily basis. How do you operate a pharma company that generates money now? I've never seen one before, but I'm building one, So that I think is underappreciated. I think it's misunderstood, but it's one of those things that we realize we can't rely on the outside world, and we need to become more independent of the capital markets and of the investment community, and to build a business that we can then decide on the scale and scope based on profits rather than investment. And that pivot has really happened over the past 6 months. I can tell you that it hasn't been an easy one, but it's one that we're proud of as we're getting much, much closer to being cash flow positive already.
For us, when we decide to invest in any company, regardless of the industry, we always look at 3 main pillars, which is product, team, and market. And for our investment in Avicanna, we were convinced of the market. I believe that a market that has been prohibited for so long is so far behind that the advancements will bring out so many important things in a small period of time. I'm convinced of the medicinal power of what you guys do. I think for us, it boiled down to team and product, because for us, it seemed like even though it's a new industry, a lot of the companies were running the business like with older executives and didn't really have an entrepreneurial dynamic to it, which we think is really important for the stage that the industry is in. And I think that Avicanna has that. You guys are living together, when you're in Colombia, everyone is together, working 24/7. It was amazing to see how you guys work together. And the product, I think you guys are nailing the product, being stubborn about it, spending money in R&D and really trying to go through the trials so that you can prove that you've created medicine that works. So for us, it came down to product and team, and I think you guys do a really good job. Before we finish, this is the question that no one wants to get, but it's a question that I think it's really useful for all the other entrepreneurs, because we all like to talk about the positive things that we've made. But for you to know what to do today and to have positive reactions and attitudes towards the company, you've have made several mistakes in the way, right? Yep. So in that way, what do you think are your major merits and your major mistakes throughout these last few years? And if you could go back in time, what would you do differently or better from what you did?
I think that's a fair question. Specifically in an industry that is in infancy stage, right? I always say on the recreational side or adult use, we usually use a baseball analogy, but I'll use a football one because we all, developing countries all are football fans. I would say we're in the second half of the benefits of the adult use or recreational market of cannabis. And I would say on the medical and pharmaceutical side, this is before the game. The game hasn't even started. If the game started, we're at the 4th minute. It's quite early. So given how early the industry is, of course we made mistakes. Of course there was things that we didn't expect, and if we would have known the direction the industry would have gone, we would have done things differently. And I'm gonna name a few. One, I have an interesting presentation from last year, from our global symposium that we did last year, where my presentation was a critique of the sector. It was a medical research symposium, and I'd like you to see my critique. Everything that I said, unfortunately, became true. I said lack of research, overvalued companies, infrastructure that doesn't make sense. The part that I mistakenly thought I would be excluded from is that when the sector melts down, they're going to look at investors, are going to look at companies and say, good, bad, 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 good. That didn't happen. Everyone went down. Everyone got hurt. Everyone got the lack of capital support and stigma. So that's a mistake on our end to assume that we're going to be excluded from this blanket negativity that the sector is going to go through. My most specific mistake, which I think hardened the team, made us a lot stronger, was when we were doing our IPO. We did a full prospectus. We did the credible way of going public. We did an IPO, not an RTO. I mean, I would tell you 1 out of 100 cannabis companies that went public did an IPO, or probably 1 or 2 out of a few hundred. It took us a very long time. And we went public in a normal world prematurely. We went public because we knew that there's a capital market frenzy, and we wanted to go out there and raise $50, $100 million and have access to capital to conclude and build this business. But because we chose the IPO path, and because we were a Colombian subsidiary, we had Colombian subsidiaries, and we were biotech and pharma, our IPO process ended up taking about 9 months, where it should have taken about an RTO would have been 1 or 2 months. So by the time that we actually became public, we missed the party. The bubble had burst. We went public July 2016, which was really 1 month into the downward slope of the cannabis sector. So that was a mistake. I think that's one that obviously, if I would have known the meltdown would happen, we would have taken a faster route to get the capital markets. Second is, prior to our IPO, we did a private placement. And at that time, pre-revenue, we did a private placement at $8. We had about $50 million on the table, and being stubborn and thinking that, looking at our peers that we at that time were substantially ahead, today we're miles ahead of, said, well, it doesn't make sense for us to be at this price. Let's only take 20 million. Let's get public and we'll raise more capital. Knowing that we will probably need more capital, I would have taken the 50 million, and that would have made things a lot easier for everyone over the past year. So those are the two major ones. I would say a lot of the mistakes we've made have been a function of the capital markets and the bubble burst. From an execution operational point of view, I'm very proud of the things we did. We have been stubborn. We have done the research and clinical work. We have done things in an ethical, sustainable way. I have my entire executive team from the beginning is with me. Our collaborators are with us. Our partners are with us. Our shareholders are with us. So at an operation level, I really don't have any major regrets. I feel very proud of what I've accomplished. It's just the capital markets, and it's things that from an exogenous factor we couldn't really control.
Yep. I hear you for the capital markets. I think a lot of the players have taken the capital markets path, and I'm not sure it was the best one. But it's really easy to go back and talk about things that already happened, but it's really hard to act upon those decisions when you have to act on
the time. Yeah. No, you had companies. I mean, a year ago, at the time, or a year and a half ago, at the time that we thought going public made a lot of sense. Obviously, if I'm looking at it today, I would have much preferred to have been a private company, right? But I can tell you, 2 years ago, there was companies trading at $2 billion, $3 billion that had less revenue than I do now. And it just made no sense, and they were raising capital at those valuations. And there was companies like Constellation Brands that went and put $5 billion into Canopy growth, probably the worst investment they've made at the time, or maybe ever, but there's a lot of these type of investments that were made. So for us, we said, wow, okay, if we can get out there and add the way we are, sustainable, low cost, biotech, clinical, if I had $50 million, oof, the things I can do from an intellectual property perspective, right? So that's kind of the way we looked at it. But yeah, it wasn't really a possibility by the time we got out there. We missed the party, but now that's forced us to really become more self-sufficient. And I think that's something that very few companies in the sector can do.
I think what you guys went through and the whole industry went through is very typical of new hype markets where people get that FOMO initially and they start buying out things, and then they realize it's not that easy, and then companies start to suffer from that, and eventually the ones that are good companies will survive and will outcome, and the other ones who were just hyping, have absolutely nothing to sell, won't go through. Yeah. Just to finish this off, I mean, what would you say to entrepreneurs who are looking to venture into the cannabis industry and or any entrepreneur who's thinking about starting a new company in this industry? What would you have to say to these people?
I would say treat it like a real company. Treat it like a real industry. Don't get hyped up by, I'm going to open a cannabis company, I'm going to put up a website and it's worth $20 million. Or I'm going to get a license and it's worth $50 million. That era is over. If you're looking to build a real business, like a real company with real competitive advantages, a real product or service, treat it as if it's not cannabis. Treat it as if it's a real business, and then expect that it's going to be harder because of the stigma, and expect that it's going to be harder to raise capital because of the stigma. And if you're up for that, then do it. But that easy path of I'm going to build a website and I'm worth $50 million is over. And I think the era where you need to be vertically integrated, like companies like us, is not a necessity. I think there's a lot of ancillary products and services within the space that have a lot of potential. And very few people are thinking about that. But I can tell you, as a vertically integrated international company, I work with a lot of those ancillary products and service companies, and they're doing well, because they're not competing with as many people. They're focused on whether it's tech or it's nutrients or it's distribution, it's marketing, whatever it is. There's a lot of ancillary services and products that have massive potential, require less CapEx, and are aligned with special skill sets that the company may have. So that would be my initial advice.
Excellent. Aras, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. This has been a great talk. I think this is an industry where a lot of people are very curious. And I think your final words have basically let everyone know that this is as tough as any other business, probably tougher. So you need to really be on your A game to be running one of these companies. Unless there's anything else that you want to say or convey, feel free to do that. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you very much again for your time. We are very well impressed with what you guys have done so far. We're fairly close to you guys. We know what's going on, and we know of the incoming challenges. And I'm pretty confident that in the next few years, Avicanna will be one of the major players in the medicinal cannabis industry by far. So, congratulations to you and your team, Aras, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Flavio. No, I really appreciate it. Everyone on the Barn team, we appreciate the continued support and the interaction, and as you mentioned, the closeness. We're quite excited about what we're doing. As you know, the level of commitment is beyond 100%. So quite excited about where the industry is going, where we're going, where the good players other than us in this industry are going. And I think the potential of it is still enormous, and it continues to be. But as any other fast evolving industry or fast growing industry, it has its ups and downs and its challenges. And I think us and the good companies within the sector continue to face those challenges and continue to win. So thank you very much again for your time, and thanks for the continued support.
Thank you, Aras. And with this, we finalize this one-on-one with Aras. This has been a great talk, and I'll see you in the next episode of one-on-one. Thank you.